Good afternoon, this is William Theo for PTV News Now. Right off the bat, we dwell on the President's sectoral huddle in Malacanang earlier today, in which he approved the proposed creation of a cabinet cluster on education. President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. in a sectoral gathering at Malacanang earlier today gave his thumbs up on a proposed creation of a cabinet cluster on education. What we will put more government in focus, continuing to address the growing needs of this huge and demanding bureaucratic institution within the entire government system. The President is rosy over the prospects of positively addressing and resolving the needs of the education sector that was forever kneecapped by the 3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic from the years 2020 to 2023. In particular, the President wants to bridge the learning gap at the elementary level, which is 5.5 years for every kid, newly minted Education SAR Secretary Sani Angara said. In addition, the cluster will serve as a mechanism to centralize all interdepartment efforts in addressing the bigger challenges that face the said sector. Among the other government agencies in the cluster include the Department of Budget and Management, Labor and Employment, and TESDA. High on the cluster's to-do list, the creation of 10-year integrated national education and workforce development plan.
He'd like us to fast-track some of the actions dahil nakikita niya yung urgency and it's a very deep-seated problem. Kumbaga, medyo matagal-tagal na kailangan tugunan. So, yun, ano sabi niya, talagang kailangan itong cluster. Pero wag tayo, parang sinabi niya na wag tayo tumigil dyan, just because the cluster is just a coordinating mechanism, di ba? We need to follow through with yung pangangailangan sa bawat sector.
So malinaw that DepEd, of course, has to do its work in terms of resolving the learning crisis, but it's not something that it could achieve on its own. Kailangan tulungan talaga yung agencies. Malaki yung ginagampanan ng CHED and TESDA, and it's really the National Education and Workforce Development Plan that is long-term, that will anchor them all to make sure that there is one coherent direction.
Meanwhile, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom sounded off an urgent plea early Monday for an immediate truce in Gaza. This while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his war cabinet, and the people of Israel brace for more serious attacks from Iran, its proxies, or from both. The joint declaration and entreaty from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and British Prime Minister Keith Starmer calls for an immediate cessation to armed hostilities, the release of all hostages held by Hamas, and the total evacuation of all Israeli defense forces in Gaza, so urgent and unfettered delivery of badly needed food, medicine, and relief items could proceed. The three-nation mediation plan also called for Iran and its allies to set aside their retaliatory attacks for the killing of 2 top leaders from Hamas and Hezbollah in Tehran and Beirut just recently. Ukraine has always been in the receiving end of the Kremlin's fury in the 2.5 years since Moscow tried to invade its neighbor in the last week of February 2022. Surprisingly enough, Ukraine has begun its push deep into Russian territory, beginning with its foray into the Kursk region, as VOA's White House correspondent Anita Powell reports from Washington, D.C.
Ukraine's war is no longer contained. So says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, confirming that his troops pushed into Russia's far western Kursk region in recent days.
It's only fair to destroy Russian terrorists where they are, where they launch their strikes from. Russian military airfields, Russian logistics. We see how useful this can be for bringing peace closer. Russia must be forced into peace if Putin wants to continue waging war so badly.
100,000 Russian civilians fled the Ukrainian push, and Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed it spurred a rise in enlistments.
It appears that the enemy is aiming to improve its negotiating positions in the future. Well, what kind of negotiations can we even talk about with people who launch indiscriminate strikes on civilians, on civilian infrastructure, and try to create threats to nuclear energy facilities? What can you talk to them about?
Both the White House and the State Department issued stern warnings to Moscow on Monday over its use of Iranian munitions.
We are prepared to deliver a swift and severe response if Iran were to move forward with the transfer of ballistic missiles, which would, in our view, represent a dramatic escalation in Iran's support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Iranian officials also continue to deny providing any UAVs to Russia when evidence is plain for the world to see.
White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby had little to say when asked Monday whether Washington was concerned that Ukraine might be using U.S.-supplied weapons against Russia.
We're continuing to speak to our Ukrainian counterparts about these operations. I'll let them speak to their operations.
Analysts say that Ukraine's move comes as a surprise and it is likely a tactic to wear down Moscow.
I think the Ukrainians wanted to bring the war home to the Russians, to say to the Russian people, no, you are not immune from this war. You are going to feel it on a day-to-day basis.
Analysts awaiting Putin's response say he may use Ukraine's incursion as an excuse to attack a NATO nation that borders Russia.
He now has evidence that Ukrainians who are armed and he claims trained and egged on by the West are now attacking Russia itself. That's how he's going to explain to the Russians that this happened and he has done nothing. So I'm thinking that, yes, I think it is going to be a pretty dangerous few days.
Something the residents of Kursk have learned in the last few days. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
And that is all for now. Join us anew for the next set of breaking stories here on PTV for your daily diet of news you can rely on from here and abroad. William Theo, and thank you for watching PTV News Now.